Welcome to the Living Clean podcast. I'm your co-host Mason S. With me as always is Travis K. This podcast is not meant to replace meetings, sponsorship, step work, or service. This is meant to be just another tool in your recovery toolbox. Our guests are here to share their experience, strength, and hope with recovery through Narcotics Anonymous. Thank you for joining us. All right, welcome back to the Living Clean podcast. I'm your co-host, Mason S. I'm an addict. With me, as always, is TK.
Yeah.
And today, we are joined by Miss Janice B. Janice, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Well, we're so glad that you could be on the podcast with us today. We're going to start off by asking you your clean date and where you attend meetings at.
My clean date is March 12th, 2003. So I celebrated 20 years last month. And my home group is called No Reservations, and it's located on an Indian reservation, which I think is kind of funny.
That is pretty interesting. So kind of tell us a little bit about your home group.
My home group is, I guess we're a little older than 20 years old. We wanted to have, start a NA meeting on the reservation because, as many people know, there's communities that are, especially the Native community, it's very devastated by addiction, and not only addiction, but diabetes and obesity, addiction being one of the diseases that prevail here. So it was a mission of, not myself. I was probably still in prison when they started this group, but yeah, they wanted to make it accessible to the natives around here because, they're a little shy and not so open to going to meetings off the reservation. So that's why initially it started, but everybody comes now. It's a big open meeting.
It's pretty successful then.
Yes, it actually is. We have probably 50 to 60 people every Friday night.
That is fantastic. That is awesome. Why don't you kind of walk us through the process of how you got to Narcotics Anonymous?
Okay, the first meeting I ever went to, I was doing some time in Florida prison for women. H&I people were coming out there and brought the meeting, and I heard the message. I was probably in my late 20s. This was like late 80s or early 90s, and I heard the message, and I felt the energy of the people that came out, and I knew it was something good, but I didn't think I needed it because I was an addict in my addiction and just not ready, and I got out twice. Well, I got out twice and went back twice. So the last time I got out was on the condition that I go to a facility, and through that facility, they brought me to meetings. And again, I heard the message a long time ago, and as we know, the message is the same. Any addict can stop using and lose the desire to use and find a new way to live. And this time it was more, it was more pertinent for me because I had been released from prison the third time. I'd been given a third chance, and they sent me to this facility. And I realized that I did not know how to live. I didn't, I didn't walk in the place like that. I walked in thinking, oh, these people, let's see how I don't need this. They're going to see how smart I am, and they're just going to throw me out of this place, and and they say what do they say? Don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle. And fortunately, because of the Department of Corrections, I couldn't leave, and eventually listened to the message. I heard the message, and it's been a journey ever since. Through people sharing their experience, strength, and hope, that was big. But the other one was the readings. I started to listen, and I heard everything, and it everything just fell into place, and I knew I needed help. And if I wanted what you guys had, then I just had to do what you guys do, and that is go to meetings, get a sponsor. I always say everything I need, I learned in the first 60 days. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps, don't use no matter what.
So you've seen the similarities and not so much the differences right off the rip, huh?
Exactly. I mean, there was a guy shared one night. He had done a lot of time in prison, and he said one day he got a call, and the chaplain, I think, had a phone call for him from his mother, and his mother said, "I don't want nothing else to do with you. You're an animal." Just ripped him and said, "Don't call me anymore. You're no longer my son." And he said he hung up the phone, and he said for the first time in his life, he said, "Damn, maybe there's something wrong with me." And I cracked up because I'm like, that's me. It was always everybody else. I could never, understand that I was responsible for my own chaos and consequences and what have you.
So when did it start to click? The things that they're sharing in here, this would apply to me and help me as well.
Like I said, I was in that facility for 8 months. And, we went to meetings. We went to both fellowships. They take you anywhere and everywhere. But I really connected to the addicts because, again, their experience, strength, and hope. And every meeting almost, you hear people say, I always felt different. So I probably want to say it was about 60 days in, 60 to 90 days in. And hearing the readings over and over and over, some things just really, just jumped out at me. Who is an addict? And, I hurt me, I hurt my family, I hurt society my whole life. Wanted something different and thought I found it in drugs, ripping and running, the finding ways and means always to, get out of myself. When I heard other people share about that, it was like, okay, that's what I've been doing my whole life, trying to get out of myself. But yeah, that's when it started to click, probably 60 days in. I realized I didn't know everything and I needed to open my mind and ask for help and be willing to listen. I picked up my white key tag at a meeting called Just Listen,
Hmm.
and that's exactly what I started to do. And I was a big turning point there about 60 days in.
What was your spiritual connection like before you got to Narcotics Anonymous?
Well, I was raised up in partly in the Baptist church and partly in my Native American teaching. So, I always believed in a higher power, a creator. It'd be due to the trauma and what do we say, life on life's terms. I just, turned down a different path and became very rebellious. I don't think I ever stopped believing in God. And I hear some people say they were angry with God. I don't think I was ever angry, but I just disconnected from everything, and without that conscious contact, I was in the throes of it, of addictions.
Janice, do you feel like your spiritual connection has changed tremendously over the years?
Oh, absolutely. And I share that whenever am asked to share my experience, strength, and hope is, I feel like NA is my Bible, my Quran, my holy, my sacred journey. And for others it's the church, it's religion, or it's some other spiritual. But for me, I found it all right here, and because I share that I feel that this journey through the steps, through the sponsor, through the fellowship, through all of it, especially service, it's an opportunity to experience a spiritual evolution. A evolution because I learned here the journey, not the destination. And I love that I can say that the God I had when I walked in is not the God I have today. I've had through the experience of the 11th step and reading and listening. And, today we have so much on YouTube and podcasts and, all kinds of things to expand my consciousness to. Because in NA, what we learn is to be open minded. I never want to be closed minded again. And not that I just fall for anything and everything or believe in everything. But what I was taught early on is that I need a higher power, and that higher power should be loving, compassionate, kind, selfless. with that as my, as my higher power in the beginning, those characteristics, I really couldn't veer too much off a path of integrity and spiritual principles. So yeah, I always say the God I had when I walked in is not the God I have today. It's not the God, I say God, but higher power that I had at 5 years. It's not the one I had 5 years ago. It's just, it's things evolve for me, and I love the word of our literature because it says, a God of my understanding. As my application of spiritual principles strengthens, and so does my open-mindedness and my walk as a spiritual person, as a being, not as totally human all the time. That is my goal, to have to walk a spiritual life, not just talk it.
Are you grateful for our program and the way that it's set up, and it allows us not to put God in a box, so to speak? And like you said, it's able to expand over that period. Like you said, it's not the same understanding you had at 5 years, and it may
Right.
be different 5 years from now. I think
Yeah.
that's a beautiful part of our program that allows us to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And this is why I put all my eggs in the NA box because, I grew up with religion. I grew up with, native spiritual teachings. Obviously, it wasn't enough, or it wasn't maybe at the right time, whatever the case may be, because, I suffered from addiction for many, many years before I got here. And I read the Bible over and over again, many times in prison. And, but what happened in NA is it's broken down very simply. We show up, we get better, and we learn to help others and, do selfless service. And it is a spiritual path, whether it may seem like it or not. But for me, that's the long and the short of it. I got here, I did some work, I cleaned house, and I learned how to get out of myself by doing for others. They say we didn't become addicted in one day. I got to a convenience store at the age of 15, and I was intending to rob the store, and in the course of that robbery, I shot and killed the cashier. And from that day on, it's been a process of trying to understand, like I said, we didn't become addicted in one day. I didn't get to that store at 15 years of age in one day. It was a history of sexual abuse, of domestic violence with my family, my father, dying from this disease, and, the sadness and the depression of growing up in that lifestyle. And I just wanted to take myself out by the time I was 13, 14 years old. And by the age of 15, I intended to do it. But as fate would have it, and unfortunately and tragically, it ended up the way it did. And I spent half my life in prison before I got to the rooms, and I didn't know how lost I was until I got here, and I heard people who had recovered from the same low self-esteem, the what do we call that, the like that death wish, like I'll do anything and everything to just get out of myself, and all of it. And when I heard those experiences, I knew I wasn't alone, and I knew I could recover, and I knew I could live a life that honors the man that I killed, instead of running around feeling guilty or responsible or covering it up with drugs and, ego and all that. I can actually live a life that honors him, and over the course of my recovery, through spiritual work and step work and applying the steps and not having secrets, I've been able to actually build a relationship with Charles. That's his name, Charles. And so I live my life to right or wrong, and it's beautiful because before I knew the steps, I saw the eighth and the ninth step and thought this couldn't work for me, but obviously it does. And and that's so I can always choke up about how grateful I am to the program and to the fellowship, and everything, the steps, the principles, everything, the the meeting before the meeting, the coffee, the everything. I'm in love with NA. I just don't love NA. I am in love with it and everything about it. Even our crazy fellows or crazy addicts, there's stories out there, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So, Janice, I got a question for you. Approaching your 4-step,
Mm-hmm.
when you have the trauma of what you was talking about a minute ago, did it
Mm-hmm.
seem like you had that ghost that's in the closet that you're so afraid of this 4-step? And the reason why I'm asking you this is for like that newcomer that's always dreading that 4-step. For me, it was the 3rd step. It was like turning my will over to the care of this higher power. That was what hung me up. It wasn't so much about taking a look at all the bad, but it's not all about the bad. But
Right.
approaching your 4-step, how did that feel about what you had to list?
Well, I gotta share with you that the first 4th step, I was totally still numbed out, and a lot of people are. It's like it takes some time to, peel that onion, so to speak, and so at the beginning I wasn't really intimidated by it because I was so disassociated from my feelings about it, like all the years in prison I could tell someone, oh, I robbed this store and I shot this man and I got this time, and it was always surface. And it wasn't until I had a suggestion to write a letter about to Charles, or actually to me, as if it was from Charles, that the paradigm changed. But so yeah, later on when I got a different sponsor than the one I'd worked my first 4th step with. And yes, when I did it the second time with her, because she was a lot warmer and really had a way of making me, take off the mask. And it was intimidating. It was totally frightening, actually, because I didn't know what was on the other side of sharing these things. Like, I didn't know if I'd be ashamed. I didn't know if I was going to cry. I didn't know if I didn't know, so definitely fear. Fear was involved. But, and just for today, it says, I believe in someone who wants to help me in my recovery, and that's what I did. I just trusted my sponsor and I just wrote it all and talked about everything. So, it wasn't easy for sure. And if you're new, nobody said, like it's gonna, I heard in years ago that if you're not in the fetal position every once in a while, we might not be doing it right, So yeah, but for some of us that have those hard bottoms, and when I got to that facility, I was 46 years old and I had been locked up 23 years of my life. So I was at that crossroads of like, number one, I don't want to go back to prison. But as I listened in the meetings and heard people share, the second part is I didn't want to be that person anymore. And I heard a thing early on and people still say it today, of course, is that the person who walked in will use again, which means I have to change, and what do you change? What do they say? Everything, right? So
Everything.
yeah, it's definitely not easy, but it's wonderful.
Necessary.
Yes, necessary. And on the other side, it was so relieving, and I probably felt like 1,000 pounds lighter, and it wasn't like I was just gonna jump off this cliff and nothing was gonna be there. My sponsors there, by then I had, like a little inner circle of strong women in recovery. So yeah, it's all a process, and sometimes it's not easy. But I didn't want to be that person that ended up where I ended up, and I didn't want to hurt people anymore. I wanted to change.
All right. So take us through the process of when somebody came up and asked you to sponsor them.
Oh my God, for many years I was like, I don't want to sponsor anybody. I don't want to. One time I told my sponsor, I said, I don't want to be responsible for someone's life. And she goes, oh my God, you're not. She said, if I felt like I was responsible for someone's life, I wouldn't sponsor anybody either. But, it took time. I had to get it into my own. I always say, a friend of mine she used to say, because she had a bad attitude at one point, and she said that her sponsor said, "Well, if you run into two or three a-holes before noon in the daytime, you might want to look at yourself." And so to give that love and to give that compassion and to give that service, I had to have it within to give. So working the steps is what happens. I started to evolve. I started to desperately seek a conscious contact so that I wouldn't be afraid. Today I can say there's not much I'm afraid of because I keep my contact, my connection as strong as I can. That's through prayer, through meditation. One of my biggest prayers or practices though is helping people, to be kind. I mean, I read somewhere years ago that the Dalai Lama says kindness is his religion. Like he says that's really what it's about: kindness, doing for others, being of service. And so that's it. That kind of wraps it up for me.
Well, Janice, tell us about service today. What does it look like?
Today, I'm the secretary at my home group at No Reservations. I'm asked to speak a lot. I mean, a lot. And my sponsor once put me on a sharing ban because, I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to take care of myself. And yeah, I don't know if you guys heard my story, but there's parts of it that really are sad and emotional. And every time I share, I'm like reliving it. And it's almost like I have to nourish myself and take care of myself because it is traumatic. And even remembering it and talking about it, even though in my core, it's been resolved, so to speak. It's reframed. I don't have the guilt. I don't have the shame. I don't have the remorse because I believe in the God of my understand. The God of my understanding is so powerful that a power of love that when Charles died, he crossed over to the source from which we all come. This incomprehensible love. So he has the capacity to forgive me. And I know he has forgiven me. And this is how we were able to develop a friendship. So it's not that I experience tremendous trauma when I share, but it does sometimes if I share twice a month for a few months, it can get a little, heavy, emotionally speaking. But I do share a lot. Actually shared yesterday. Probably in the last 2 weeks, probably three times. And, but I really, really enjoy sharing because that's what helped me. I went to this big church meeting in North Miami and it was a speaker meeting. And every time, and I looked forward to it after a while. I wanted to hear how these people got clean and how they're happy. And the ability to sit up on it was a big stage and to just talk and see people comfortable in their own skin. I wanted that so bad. So this is why I share, because I've been through things that could, have, well, pretty much destroyed me for a while. But thank God for the program of Narcotics Anonymous. I found a way out.
I think the big hope shot and all that you've been through is the fact that you have found a way to get past a lot of those things, and a lot of that mess that you went through is now part of your message. And I can see why people ask you to share a lot, but I think it's good that what you said about, every time you share, you give a piece of yourself. So you always got to make sure that your cup is full too. I could see where that could get emotionally taxing, but I'm extremely grateful that you're willing to open up and share a lot of that stuff because it makes me, when I heard you share it out of the darkness, it made me look at the things that I put on my eighth and ninth step, and I seen you be able to find such a beautiful way to look at it. When you talked about taking Charles everywhere with you now. And
Yes.
yeah, and that gave me so much hope that the things that I was holding on to, that I could let them go and there was something beautiful on the other side.
Absolutely. I mean, other people's experience, strength, and hope, and the connection with my God is, priceless. I couldn't function without it. And but yeah, that was a great convention. I really enjoyed being there.
Janice, is there anything that we haven't spoke about that you'd like to share with the people listening?
Actually already brought it up, and that's the what we said about the fourth step, and the steps in general, because me, like a lot of people, like a lot of lazy addicts, I felt like it was schoolwork, and I hated school, I hated writing. And one of my biggest defects is procrastination. So I put it off, I didn't get on it, and when I finally did, and got with a sponsor that I totally was open with and could really take direction from, it was like I wanted to kick myself that I hadn't done it before, even though in the beginning, it wasn't something I jumped into right away. As much as I wanted to change and as much as I wanted to be a better person, I didn't jump in my steps right away. So if you're new and you're not doing it, then don't be like me. I feel like I prolonged my sense of freedom and my sense of growth and spiritual connection. Like we always say, that there's a Narcotics Anonymous is a 12-step program. The program is the 12 steps, and I was there going to meetings and, learning, meeting new people, experiencing a life of, you know, recovery, but I wasn't working my steps, so I know now that, I stayed in my defects and maybe my, loneliness and isolation a little longer than I had to. So, I just encourage anyone that is feeling like, isolated or, I was very, very, I don't, it's not shyness. It was that didn't want to deal with people, didn't want to be around people. I didn't know these people, it was just preconceived fear, I guess, intimidation. Like I felt like everybody knew I was from prison. I felt like I acted like a convict, like all the self, how back in the day they'd say, don't even worry about that. You're not that important. Like, you walk in a meeting, you think everybody's looking at you. Nobody was paying me no mind. It was all between my ears, and so I like that through the steps we learn how to be humble and, and to walk a life, to walk a life with integrity. That's so huge to me. And, and I was a big thief. Like my story's not unique. I was a big thief, a big liar. I mean, I just lied to lie. I didn't even know why, it was just come out before I think about it. And and in prison it was all about getting over, outsmarting the officers, and that mentality. And today I don't live like that. I have police officers as friends. I have, I respect them. I don't, I know that we're all come from a source. I believe that we all come from the same source, that we're spirits with this bodysuit on, and when it comes down to it, we have a choice every day how we want to walk, how we want to act, how we want to be. And I'm just so grateful to the NA for teaching me how to have that love for other people and not be shy. I'm not, most Indians, my tribe for sure, don't talk much. I talk so much, it's crazy. But I got it in NA.
But what are some of the challenges you faced in the last 20 years since you've been in recovery that you've had to overcome?
Kind of like what I'm talking about, learning to be comfortable, around people. And it's still a challenge. I don't go to malls. I don't, I'm like NA conventions I have gotten, because I love the program and I love recovery. It's a lot more easier for me to be around a group of people like that. in like a big group. But I was severely institutionalized for many years. And even to this day, I get severe anxiety sometimes if I have to go to Walmart or, I go late at night. It's a little challenging. It's uncomfortable because I'm recovering from PTSD and anxiety and depression, and those things are like, if it was a 10 when I got here, today it's probably like a 2 or a 3, but they flare up. So it was challenging to become a part of the fellowship, but again, it's like doing my steps. If I had, got into it sooner, I would have been in the solution sooner. But now, I have so many friends. I have a real strong inner core of friends that, yesterday we went to celebrate my good friend, her 35th. We had a little pool party. And sometimes I have an out of body experience. I'm looking at myself, talking, socializing, feeling comfortable. And I'm like, who is that person? It's just so crazy, but you know what? I have a good life and I stay grateful no matter what. That's what I was taught. No matter how bad things seem, because a lot of it is, how do you say it? Imagined. It's my perception. And so I've learned that, I don't know about you guys, but they say my disease wakes up before me, right?
Yeah.
Because when I open my eyes, it's like, oh my God, you should have got up sooner. Oh, she shouldn't have stayed up late. You shouldn't have done this. You should. And I'm like, you know, in that second, I know what's going on and I pray. I say, thank you, God. My first prayer is thank you, God. Thank you, God. I don't thank God for anything specific. I say, thank you, God, because I have to connect. I have to get that conscious contact and I have to shut that voice down, because if I listen, I'd still be crazy. And not that I'm not really still crazy, but I'm crazy in a good way now. But that's the challenges I have. And that's a challenge any addict has, because we all have the voice. We all have those misperceptions, and and but for me today, I'm grateful that I learned how to get in the solution. And that's prayer. I mean, and it's not like I get on my knees every morning or every night, or I'm like, it's a formal prayer. My prayer is usually, thank you, God, and thank you for waking me up, or thank you for, and I sometimes I just say thank you, thank you over and over and over. That's a prayer for me. It's almost like a mantra. Because when you get down to it, I did 23 years in prison. I lived my life in handcuffs and ankle chains, and bend over and cough and urinate in a cup, and get treated by people in ways that, people shouldn't treat people. And you know what? Today I don't have that. I just made me a sandwich. You know what I mean? I walked to my refrigerator and made me a salami and cheese sandwich. I am so grateful for the little things, and the Creator delivered me from that state of mind, that physical state of in prison, but also, delivered me from the. I was just thinking about this Eagles song about something that about freedom, but we've always had it. Gosh, I was just singing it a while ago. It's my senior
Already
moment.
gone.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. Yeah, we were just singing it a while ago, and I said, "That's it." It was and God is within. And God lives within me, within my spirit. I am a part of the. Remember when I said a native saying? It says, how foolish would it be for the branch to think that it's not part of the tree?
Yeah.
So I am a piece of the Almighty, of the everlasting, the energy that has no beginning and no end. And so I try to honor that. I try to honor that through my walk, through my talk, through service. which is why, you guys were thanking me for doing this. I'm thanking you for asking me, because I love service. I have to do it.
Janice, thank you so much for sharing your experience, strength, and hope today. We'll see all of y'all next week.
Thank you for joining us on our Living Clean podcast. This is another platform that we can share our message of recovery, which is any addict can stop using drugs, lose a desire to use, and find a new way to live. Join that no matter what club. You can contact us through text. The number is 931-306-9364.